This talk is going to be about the many different ways in which our brain can seem to be working for us, but also against us. I mean, neuroscientists and psychologists have been trying for years to decipher the brain in an attempt to try and sort of get a grasp of how the human mind works. But if you take a step back and you think about it, it's kind of an absurd idea. We're probably the only species in the world that tries to use an instrument, i.e. the brain, to try and understand the limitations of the very same instrument. Doesn't really seem to make sense. But anyway, perception is how we see things, or how we feel things and hear things and experience things around us. It is often said that we don't see things as they truly are, but rather we see things as we are. This sort of makes you wonder about what then is reality. I'm sure you all remember the big internet sensation a few months ago with the blue and black dress, or was it gold and white? I can't really remember. But the one thing I remember from that is the fact that as much as I tried to try and see things from the other people's perspective, I just kept on failing. I had my own way of understanding and I had my own way of seeing things, and I couldn't change that. Now, we're all familiar with the concept of yin and yang, the sort of duality through which all of life is experienced. The sort of polarity is the same with regards to our behavior. Now, Charles Duhigg, he is a New York Times writer. He came up with what he calls the habit loop to try and explain how our brain actually forms habit and the things that we do. So now, if you walk downstairs at 3 p.m. to try and get a piece of cake from the cafeteria, you're probably not even realizing that you're not making that decision. 3 p.m. being the cue is instigating some sort of routine, i.e. you walk down to the cafeteria so that you can have a reward, i.e. something sweet on your lips. So if you ever want to try and change your habits, try and make sure that you focus on the routine and also the cue to get to the same reward. Now, one thing that scares me is the fact that our deeper selves is actually based on a level of subconscious that we don't even understand or have access to. One thing that you can see this with is with regards to language, how language actually influences a lot of the things that we do. It is often said that language is simply a combination of vibration and matter. And I think this sort of makes sense because it explains why storytelling is such a deep human emotion and such a deep and integral part of who we are. But unfortunately, through the stories that we tell, we can create some sort of perversion whereby we use stories to tell a single story through creating stereotypes. Now, Chimamanda Ngozi put it quite beautifully when she said, the problem with stereotypes is not that they're untrue, but rather that they are actually incomplete. If we take a step back and we tell stories that are beautiful and they're truthful, then we can actually see that stories start to become a window to our soul. But at the same time, they can also become a window through which we perceive the world that is around us. A research report in the United States sort of went through an experiment to show how language actually affects the things that we do. So for example, they took two groups of people. One group of people used the words I can't, and the other group of people used the words I don't. And those who use the word I don't were often more successful in the things that they set out to do compared to those who used I can't. And that's because I can't is disempowering. There's something about it that tells you that there's resistance or that there's restrictions. Whereas with I don't, you are actually making that decision and you are choosing. And this can also be seen through our different languages. So if you compare English, which is a future language, compared to Mandarin or Hausa or Hebrew, you can actually see that there are different ways in which people actually behave based on what their language is. So if you speak a language that is futureless, you tend to actually not put a distinction between today and tomorrow. And we actually find that people who speak futureless languages tend to save more, they tend to be less obese, they tend to smoke less, and they tend to be much more safer in their sexual encounters. Now, I find it very interesting how language develops and evolves throughout the ages. I mean, we add words, we create new words, we remove certain words. If you think about a lot of words that we use today, many of them didn't exist a few centuries ago. And some examples of those are hangry, which is basically a state of anger induced by hunger, or something like adorkable, when someone is both adorable but also a dork. Or something like lol, how we don't actually use that to mean laugh out loud anymore. It's quite absurd. This American Life, a podcast in America, recently did a story of a 26-year-old whose brain created this fantastical dream that landed him believing that he was a spy, and eventually he ended up in the hospital with bullet wounds. Now, this is just a simple example to show how what we take in through language and what we take in through what we perceive can actually trick our brains to end up betraying us, to get to a point whereby we don't necessarily know the difference between what's real and what is unreal. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please do me one favor. Be very careful of the things that you feed to your brain, because at the end of the day, that is the house that you have to live in for the rest of your life.